A Ukrainian National Guard soldier of the 4th Force of Freedom Battalion single-handedly captured 6 Russian invaders. The soldier, armed with grenades and carrying a firearm, started throwing grenades at the enemy dugout where 6 armed Russian invaders were located. The invaders could not raise their heads from the constant shooting and explosions and tried to protect themselves from the bullet fragments with whatever they had at hand. Unwilling to engage in combat, they started shouting that they wanted to surrender, after which they were offered to leave the shelter without weapons. After leaving the dugout, the Russian soldiers were disarmed and marched in a convoy toward the Ukrainian positions. When the Russian soldiers reached the positions of the Ukrainian defenders, they received appropriate medical care, were fed, and said that they were thrown to the slaughter without support. The Russian invaders did not receive any relevant military training, and, as one of them noted, they gave the salaries they received to their commanders. It should be noted that recently, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have been increasingly capturing Russian soldiers, whom the command uses as human shields and sends to slaughter. This applies not only to healthy soldiers, but also to wounded ones. For example, in early February 2025, Russian commanders sent 2 infantrymen, one on crutches and the other unable to walk, to storm Ukrainian positions in the Pokrovsk sector. On January 18, 2025, it was reported that the Russian military sent disabled soldiers on crutches into battle near the village of Novotroitske, Donetsk region. The video captures 2 Russian soldiers walking across the field using crutches. However, the Ukrainian military used drones to detect and neutralize them. We previously reported that a group of Russian soldiers with a white flag surrendered to a Ukrainian drone, which brought them to the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Only a week earlier, Ukrainian paratroopers in another area in the Kursk region replenished the exchange fund with 21 invaders belonging to the airborne forces and Marines of the Russian armed forces. Russian soldier is inspecting his dead comrades.
Here's basically an UAZ was parked here. Damn, they took it. The guys are lying down. Vladislav here. Non-lethal. Why the hell, bro? Body armor, damn. In the back. I don't get it. This guy's took a jam. Got it, but... Search the guns completely. This is not ours. This is ours.
Russian soldiers inspect their URAL, which was attacked by an FPV drone in the Donetsk direction. Everyone in the truck burned to death.
That's it, stop. No fish, I'm ready.
Yes, it's like that.
Here they are, guys. They're all heavy. They're all light. Damn, they're all burnt. Everything burned. Completely. That one is still burning. Fuck. Damn it. Oh, damn. What a mess. How do we get it out now? I don't know.
In Vladivostok, a new section with graves of Russian Marines has appeared at the Lesnoy Cemetery. All the graves are identical, as if they were not placed by relatives, but by some office using a template. And all this is because of brigade commanders like Gudkov, who sit in their offices and just shout, "Where we are, there is victory." And as a result, cemeteries are growing like mushrooms after rain. Senator Mark Kelly says, "Did Russia invade Ukraine?" It's a pretty simple question I had for the Deputy Secretary of Defense nominee. It's an obvious yes to everyone except this administration.
Mr. Feinberg, did Russia invade Ukraine?
Well, going to my behind closed doors statement a second ago, I'll just say this.
They moved tanks and troops and armored personnel carriers across the Ukrainian border? It's a pretty simple question.
Yeah. Well, here's how, if I may, I'd like to
If
say,
you would ask the chairman of this committee if Russia invaded Ukraine, I'm pretty sure, the Republican chairman, I'm pretty sure I would know the answer.
Without U.S. support, European countries will have to mobilize up to 300,000 soldiers and invest 250 billion euros annually in defense to counter Russian military power. This is evidenced by the analysis of a new study by the Brussels-based Bruegel Research Institute and the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. It is estimated that Europe will need to make significant defense investments of about 250 billion euros per year to effectively counter Russian military power. The authors assume that Europe will have to deploy about 50 additional brigades totaling 300,000 soldiers. This would require at least 1,400 new tanks and 2,000 infantry fighting vehicles, which would exceed the current stocks of all the ground forces of Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. In addition, Europe would have to produce about 2,000 long-range drones annually. Even if the scale is large to begin with, it is economically manageable given the economic power of the EU, and the additional costs are only about 1.5% of EU gross domestic product. This is far less than what had to be mobilized to overcome a crisis, for example, during the COVID pandemic. Professor Guntram Wolff, co-author of the analysis and senior fellow at the Kiel Institute for World Economics, shared. The authors emphasize that Russia has significantly increased its military capabilities despite the heavy losses in the war in Ukraine. At the end of 2024, the Russian grouping of troops in Ukraine numbered about 700,000 soldiers. This is significantly more than during the invasion in 2022. In addition, about 1,550 tanks and 5,700 armored vehicles were produced and refurbished in 2024, an increase of 220% and 150% respectively compared to 2022. Russia has also made significant progress in the production of drones and other long-range weapons. Russia can build up a sufficient military force to attack EU countries in the next 3 to 10 years. We must classify this as a real danger. This is another reason why it is in Europe's interest to prevent a Russian victory in Ukraine, which could further fuel Russian aggression, Wolff said. According to the analysis, one of the biggest problems is the coordination of European troops. While the U.S. armed forces operate as a single entity, European armies are divided into 28 national armed forces. It will cost us more if each country tries to defend itself. Self-defense is more expensive than collective defense. That is why closer coordination and joint procurement are important, Wolff noted. The authors propose increasing European defense spending from the current 2% to 3.5 to 4% of GDP per year. This would mean that the EU and its member states would have to jointly raise an additional 250 billion euros annually. Half of this could be financed by European debt and used for joint intergovernmental procurement, which would provide cost advantages over national procurement. The other half could be financed by member states through national defense spending.
1040.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Rescues every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.